All right, welcome back to the UND GradTalk podcast, everyone. A podcast where we interview people who are pursuing graduate degrees, studies, or are just going on in life. So today we have a very special guest, Cailey Isaacson. Cailey, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, yeah.
All right, so in my notes here I have that you are pursuing a PhD in biology with a research in wildlife, ecology, and management. We'll get into that a little bit more in a bit, but can you kind of just talk about what you've been up to lately?
Yeah, so kind of what I've been up to lately, or what my normal duties kind of consist of for my PhD research, is I study wild turkeys across the state of North Dakota. And so we put GPS backpacks on these turkeys across the state, and we had over 200 birds. So basically a lot of my job is traveling around the state, tracking these birds, being outside in the field. And then eventually I go back to Starcher Hall here on campus, and I spend a lot of time on my computer doing classwork. And then I'm now getting into the phases of data analysis and writing. So not as much time outside these days compared to what I used to do, but a good mix of computer work. And then a lot of my time is spent outside.
Mm-hmm. So it says, or I have written down that you got your bachelor's degree here at UND2 in fisheries and wildlife. Can you kind of talk a little bit about that, what your experience with your undergraduate was?
Yeah, so it was kind of a no-brainer for me to come here to the University of North Dakota to get this degree. I had done a lot of research about wildlife programs. I knew really early on that's what I wanted to do for my career. So I did some research. I'm originally from Minnesota, so I didn't want to go too far away from home. So, just the state next door. And so I came here to UND right away, was in the Fish and Wildlife program. And then in my very first introductory class to the Fish and Wildlife program, I had met a professor and an advisor who kind of gave me a research opportunity in her lab. And I honestly never left. I had such a great time in that lab pursuing research. And, that kind of formed what I wanted to do. And working with my advisor, we discussed kind of graduate degree for me in the future. So I kind of spent a lot of my undergrad degree kind of preparing to go to grad school, and ended up staying here at UND for grad school as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, where did you kind of, growing up, why did you choose to kind of go into this field of study?
Yeah, so I can blame my parents for that, because growing up in Minnesota, my parents kind of made, they had some excuses for my sister and I to miss school every once in a while to go outside. And I did grow up hunting, so there was a lot of Fridays I was maybe not at school growing up. And my parents always said that not every classroom has four walls, kind of meaning that nature can be a teacher and you can learn a lot of things from observing the natural world. And I took my parents' advice literally and decided to make nature my classroom, and UND offered that with the Fish and Wildlife program here.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, what did you have any specific, you just talked about your parents, but any mentors growing up, or even just here at UND?
Yeah, I guess growing up, a lot of it was my parents just being really supportive and pursuing our own interests, both in school and out of school. But the funny story is, literally that very first semester when I was here, I ended up just being in a hallway, and one of the professors from an intro class for the Fish and Wildlife major kind of caught me and said, I've seen your work in class. I think you've been doing good work, and we have a lot of personal interests that align. I have a job that seems that it would fit your career goals. Do you want to meet with me? And I, said yes to that meeting, and I'm very glad I did, because I worked in that lab through all 4 years of my undergrad, and then that person is actually my advisor now for my graduate degree.
Okay. How did you get into kind of, obviously PhD in bio, and then researching wildlife turkeys and stuff like that?
Yeah. Essentially, I had always kind of known, again, that I wanted to do wildlife work, but I didn't necessarily know right away that I wanted to pursue a graduate degree. I thought I was going to maybe be a pilot and go fly around and chase wildlife and put bands on birds to study them. And then as I progressed through the undergrad program, I learned I had a lot more interest in answering questions and actually pursuing research. And so my advisor, Susan Feligi, really cultivated that interest. And so growing up, I was really interested in birds, and I had continued that interest throughout my undergrad degree. And she kind of told me, I think you'd be set up, or you're somebody who would be qualified to do a graduate degree. And she potentially had a project that personally aligned with my interests coming down the pipeline. And one of the things about going to graduate school is you have to love your research project, and you have to have a good relationship with your advisor if you want to be successful. And it was a research project she had that I was very interested in. And then her and I had a great relationship, and I couldn't pass that up. So when that opportunity did actually come to fruition, I said yes. And turkeys was definitely not on my radar. I'll be the first person to admit I never thought I would be studying turkeys. But that's just the project that came up. And then the North Dakota Game and Fish Department had a lot of questions about wild turkeys in the state in terms of how they wanted to manage for the users and the people who actually are potentially turkey hunters in North Dakota. And so they had a lot of questions, which then led them to the university to work with to get some of these questions answered. And I guess I just happened to be right place, right time a little bit.
Okay, yeah. What kind of goes into like the research for what you're doing with that?
Yeah, so it can be pretty intensive at times. Mm-hmm. Like I said, originally the North Dakota Game and Fish Department had a list of questions that they wanted. Turkeys are actually not native, so they were not originally in the state of North Dakota, but they're all over the place now. Mm-hmm. And they're even kind of a nuisance here in some places of North Dakota. Mm-hmm. There's viral videos of them running around towns and chasing kids, and we do get that occasionally here. And so the state wanted to know a little bit more about the survival, their reproduction, so how successful they are at having chicks, and just some general movement questions about where the turkeys are in the state. And it's a really big project that requires a lot of time that they maybe can't necessarily do as a state agency, just with limited personnel. And so that's kind of where the partnership with UND came in, because you can have a graduate student spend a few years on a project. Mm-hmm. And then we worked with some other outside entities to get some funding secured to pursue this research. So a lot of collaboration. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, what kind of does that collaboration, would you say, look like between UND and the Fish and Game Department? Are you guys constantly working together, like with people with them? Is it more of they'll give you like something they want to see and then you guys go out and find that? Or like how does that relationship work?
Yeah, so I technically was not here when the project was originally developed, or I was not necessarily involved in the original development of the project. Again, they came to us with questions, but to actually work with the birds, so again, we captured 200 turkeys and I got to handle them and put backpacks on them, but to actually go out and capture the birds to then study them involves the North Dakota Game and Fish Department. So they actually trap birds every year. A lot of them are, maybe Bismarck birds or birds that are in town causing some issues. So they transport a lot of these birds or translocate them. And so that was kind of an opportunity for us to work with ranchers that had some issues with turkeys or some urban areas that had issues with turkeys and capture birds. We primarily worked with private landowners with cattle operations. So we do a lot of private landowner collaboration. And so the state agency works with them, captures the birds, kind of gives me a phone call to show up with all the equipment. Once they've got the birds, we show up. Again, 200 turkeys. Surprisingly, I didn't get beat up by any turkeys. They were pretty docile to handle. And we put these backpacks on them and they got released. And a lot of the post-release monitoring is on the students here at UND, so myself, and then I've been very lucky to have 2 student technicians work under me on the project. And then actually both of those students are now graduate students here as well.
Cool. Yeah, so what does like the monitoring process look like? You just drop them off wherever or where they came from? And then how does like the tracking work too?
Yeah, so our project, we had a little bit of both, where we left turkeys behind at the capture site. But since a lot of the turkeys we worked with, or all the turkeys that we worked with in my case were nuisance turkeys, they had to get removed. So they were private landowners that called and said, get these turkeys out of my yard. Some neighbors loved that, some neighbors didn't. But those turkeys we then captured, put the backpacks on, and they were released to public land, to wildlife management areas in the state, as far away as basically the western border of the state. So we brought birds to those sites, just better for everyone, better habitat for the turkeys themselves. But then just to actually be able to have some controls and some comparisons with our study to actually look at the effect of translocating these birds, we did leave about 20% behind at every capture site. So then that doubled the number of sites across the state. But theoretically, the GPS or GSM backpacks is what they're called. I was supposed to be able to sit here on campus and pull up my laptop and track some of these birds in real time, which would have been ideal. Yeah. But technology wasn't everything it was made to be. So a lot of the time we're boots on the ground. So we're spending a lot of time at these sites, being in close range of these birds to download their GPS data. Some tags didn't have that ability to upload via the cellular network where I could look at my laptop, so we're required to be out on the landscape anyways. But ideally, we were trying to get locations from these birds every hour, which a lot of the time they could just upload to some equipment we leave out on the landscape, so I don't actually have to be there every hour. But you have birds die. During the nesting season, you have turkeys on nests. So I spent a lot of time outside. In the summer, we're basically outside the entire year. And then we try to do biweekly checkups at this point of the project now.
Yeah, how often are you out in the field and then where are you going to do your research and then or check up on the turkeys?
Yeah, when we had birds alive early on at the beginning of the study, so in the first year we captured 100 birds, and then the second year we caught 111 turkeys. Not all birds survived from year 1 into year 2, so it's not like I had 211 turkeys alive at one time. But early on in the project, when we had, over 100 birds alive, there was a lot more time outside. I was basically traveling every week to different sites. We captured turkeys from 8 private landowners. So we had those 8 sites where we left a couple behind. And then all the other birds were brought to those 2 wildlife management areas. So technically there was 10 spots across the state. I'm not allowed to exactly share where, but literally think 5 hours away was one of my sites. Okay. The closest one was an hour. So anywhere from an hour to 5 hours driving out there, collecting data from these birds. But then if a bird dies, you can have some pretty crazy adventures trying to go recover those backpacks, because part of the job is hiking out there to go get the backpacks. And so when they end up in trees or along riverbanks, your workday ends a little bit longer than if they're just, unfortunately, a turkey that was hit by a car, where it's a little bit easier pickup on the side of the road. But it really depends. And now there's only 28 birds alive at this point. So, we can get through our field work a lot quicker at this point in the project.
Yeah, I was going to say, have you had any memorable experiences with that or funny stories? Oh
my gosh. I probably have a few. I'm trying to think of some right off the bat. A lot of them are probably more memorable than funny, but I say I'm getting a degree in wildlife biology, but I'm kind of stealing this line from one of my project advisors or co-advisors, essentially, is that you get a little bit of a mini engineering degree. So a lot of the times we have extending poles that you end up having to put little saws on with duct tape and try to climb things, which again, being safe, but you get in some interesting predicaments trying to get the transmitters out of trees or in steep banks. A lot of the time I'll start my day thinking I'm only going to be hiking, half a mile to get a transmitter, and then it's 4 hours. 4 hours later and we finally get one. We've had some transmitters that have ended up in water bodies, and luckily they get snagged on a bunch of deadfall, but then you end up kind of crawling through a bunch of dead logs and anything else that gets kind of debris that gets caught up in that, trying to find a little turkey transmitter. But a lot of, I guess the one thing I can say is no 2 days are the same. Yeah. So. Well,
that's good then. Yeah, I mean, as a PhD student, what would you say some of the biggest challenges you faced just, at UND, or even just doing field work and data collection?
Yeah, great question. Some of the challenges I faced, a lot of it is probably my own fault a little bit, but time management, just because with the way my research project is set up, I spend a lot of time traveling and a lot of time not on campus. So, and I'm still taking classes, right? So trying to balance, maintaining good grades, getting classwork done, but then also doing the data analysis and the computer work that comes after the field work. So you have to complete all of your field work to kind of get to those next steps. And again, some days in the field can be, it's 12 hours in the field. And then the last thing I want to do when I get home is do homework or classwork. Yeah. So some of my challenges is just kind of time management. But I can say the professors that I've worked with so far at UND have been really understanding. I think a lot of them were once obviously grad students, but then they deal with a lot of grad students, so they understand the nuances that go into data collection. And so I've been able to do a lot of stuff online, which is really helpful when I'm traveling across the state.
Yeah, I was going to say, with your relationship with your professors, stuff like that, can you kind of talk about the role they play and how, they maybe made it easier, or how they've challenged you in a way here at UND? Yeah,
another great question. At this point, a lot of the professors I've worked with are outside of the biology department, actually. And they've been just as understanding and just as accommodating with that. A lot of the times they challenge me in ways of, if I take a class that's not directly biology related or within the department, they challenge me to understand how my research fits in with that class. So I take a lot of communication classes, science communication classes, and I get asked a lot of questions about communicating my research. So they challenge me in ways to look at my research differently and how I present that and how I talk about that. So, which is not necessarily something I normally do on my day-to-day research. So that's also really interesting. But it's hard to say it's challenging because it ends up being really beneficial in the long run.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, having graduated with a bachelor's degree from UND, how has that experience kind of changed your life and then helped transition you into where you're at right now with your graduate studies?
Yeah, I mean, if I didn't do my undergrad here, I could very safely say I would likely not be here now as a graduate student. I loved my time here as an undergrad. It was the easiest decision to stay here. And one of the things I tell anyone who's considering a graduate degree is that you have to have a good relationship with your advisor and you have to enjoy the project you're doing because transitioning from undergrad to grad school is hard. It has inherent challenges, and a lot of the challenges I was lucky enough to not necessarily face because I was staying here in Grand Forks, staying at a university and working with people I knew, and it was still difficult. So if I had all those things helping me, I can only imagine kind of going to a different place, how extra difficult that is. But there are days that research gets hard or I don't necessarily have the energy to go do fieldwork, but you got to get it done. And being here working with people I've worked with and established relationships with has honestly gotten me through a lot of the challenges that come with this. So I'm very grateful I ended up staying here. I was going to say I've been here for 8 years now, so I must like UND and I must like Grand Forks.
Yeah, I mean, what advice would you give to maybe new graduates, students that are pursuing a degree similar to yours?
Yeah, a lot of the advice I'd give to everyone, whether you've just started or are looking to, pursue a graduate degree, would to say yes to things. This is probably not the best advice. Like I'm saying, I have trouble with time management, so saying yes to a lot of things can make that more challenging. But just say yes. There are so many opportunities that you get with your advisor, within the department, within the university that really benefit you in the long run, are really great for professional building and just skill building that you just have to say yes to. And sometimes if it's something you're not necessarily sure about, still say yes, because knowing what you want to do is just as valuable as knowing what you don't want to do. So I was very grateful that I tried a couple different internships and I studied a couple different wildlife species before I kind of decided what I was going to do. And, I found certain things that I really wanted and certain things I didn't. And so when it came to deciding to go to grad school and what type of research I wanted to do, it made that decision so much easier.
Yeah, like the research you're doing right now, how would you say, or what do you see that down the road impacting, wildlife management practices in the future, just other stuff in that realm?
Yeah, since my research is so closely tied with North Dakota Game and Fish Department, a lot of the project outcomes are things that they want to see or answer, or questions they want answered for their own management. So when we're looking at the survival of these turkeys just on an annual basis, but also the survival of moving these birds, it really helps them understand how they deal with these nuisance turkeys. Just because these turkeys, again, are nuisances and they're called to remove them and translocate them to different places. But if they basically spend thousands of dollars a year to go catch these turkeys and they release them on public land and they don't survive, that's a lot of money with not a very positive outcome for the turkeys. So that's some of the questions we aim to answer with this project. Just, how is the money being allocated? Is it actually something that is helping the turkeys be successful while helping the public here in North Dakota? But also, one of the jobs of the North Dakota Game and Fish Department is to manage game populations for hunters. And so we're trying to understand survival in terms of hunting, reproduction in terms of future hunting, and with turkeys not being native here and our cold winters, our turkeys it's looking like they're nesting later compared to some of the surrounding states even, and especially states in the south or southeast. And so our hunting seasons potentially could be shifted even later in the year, just depending on what the final reproduction dates actually look like. But there's potential implications in changing hunting regulations or season dates to be better for hunters, but more importantly, or just as importantly, better for the turkeys as well. So we hope that there are some very direct management implications that can come for our turkeys here. But as turkeys keep moving northwards and into more Canadian provinces and other states, they might also see regulations that shift closer to ours, depending on the outcomes of this research. So.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, you already kind of just talked about it a little bit, but what are some of the more interesting things you've learned about the turkeys? I mean, yeah, you just highlighted it a little bit with change in, mating season and whatnot, but like, can you talk about some of the interesting things that you've learned?
Yeah, well, oh my gosh, I have learned a lot about turkeys besides that they taste good at Thanksgiving, which is about all I knew before I started, if I'm being honest. Some things that are not necessarily so surprising is that, again, our turkeys may be nesting later. But one thing that I did find pretty surprising is that we are releasing these birds on two very separate wildlife management areas, but they're very similar in what those management areas look like in terms of vegetation and how they're managed. Yet we're seeing really high survival at one and not necessarily the other. So I haven't figured this out yet, but just kind of teasing apart what those differences are on the landscape where we're seeing that survival. But essentially, we're taking these nuisance turkeys. A lot of them come again from cattle operations. So they're used to seeing cattle feed or cattle out and knowing that's kind of an easy buffet in the winter to get food. And they're captured and then they're released out in the middle of nowhere. There's no cattle, no easy food. And I expected them to have a little bit more of like a shock to that.
Yeah.
But essentially they seem to settle for a little bit and then they kind of end up finding just the next cattle operation and moving over there. But unfortunately, not all the turkeys survive. So by the time they kind of move to these private lands, there's not necessarily in such great numbers as they started out with. So it doesn't seem like we're creating any new problems anywhere, but the turkeys just really seem to like agriculture, which I was surprised by. We only have a few trees here in North Dakota, which turkeys need, but man, I think they love those barns and cattle yards more than they like the trees here, which I found surprising.
What do you think draws them towards that?
I think it's just got to be the food, like just the easy food. Again, if you have not so much last couple winters, but the first year we started this in 2023, we had a ton of snow. And if you were a turkey, I would not want to be walking through all that snow trying to find food versus you just go to the next farmyard and you got easy grain and spilled silage and just any cattle feed that is just really easy to go eat. And if the rancher doesn't care too much, you can kind of get away with it. And so I think that's what draws them in. It's just got to be the food, but they're also space heaters. Talk about surprising. I did not think turkeys were going to do that well in our winters. Holy smokes. When we're capturing them in January, February, and March. So the cold time of the year when we're capturing them and we're out there handling them and they are little space heaters. I could not believe it. Yeah.
I mean, looking at your time, your 8 years here at UND, what would you say are some of the biggest skills you've developed just being here or some of the main things you've learned?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I've learned a lot. Again, just having those connections and that support system. One of the benefits about staying here at UND and instead of trying to go somewhere new is I had a lot of pre-existing connections in place, but in wildlife biology, and I would say any discipline, who you know matters a lot. So I was able to really keep my connections, solidify those, but then use that as branching off points to network with people. I would like to stay in the Northern Great Plains. And so I've been able to really spend a lot of effort and put a lot of energy into making connections and networking here since I've just been here long enough. And just with the awesome research I get to do, I have a lot of opportunities to go out and present my research to folks. And that's been really a really incredible way for me to make some connections. And the more practice you get, I guess, with that, right, your communication skills come with that. But being here for so long, it's also allowed me to have a little bit of a leadership position in my lab, just because I am, unfortunately, or the senior lab member at this point, just because I've been here longer than some of the new students in our lab. And so I've had, the ability to have a little bit of institutional knowledge and help out, or at least I hope help out with some of the folks in the lab. But just building those support systems within the lab has been huge, because I know I can go to any of them for help. And the connections and the collaboration. The organizations that we work with, I'm fortunate enough to work with not just one or two people at those organizations. I think over half the state agency has probably helped me with the turkey project at this point. So,
yeah, I mean, talk about your leadership role a little bit more. What does that look like, and how did you kind of get into that position?
I don't want to be too crazy saying that, but at this point, just being here long enough, I was very fortunate enough that, again, I had a lot of lab members that were PhD students when I started, but since I joined the lab I'm in now as an undergrad, doing undergrad research, I had the opportunity to work with a lot of those grad students while I was an undergrad, and that's something I highly recommend undergrads do if they have the chance. And so I was able to learn from them kind of early on some of the duties of grad school, or what it's like to be a graduate student, kind of straight from them, and just seeing how they helped each other. But by the time I became a grad student, I had already kind of learned a little bit about the process and some of the administrative things that you have to do in terms of like forms and just certain stages you should be at by, certain semesters. And I had heard a little bit of that from them before I started. So I felt like I had a little bit of knowledge beforehand. And then that's just something that myself and a lot of my lab mates that are also PhD students that have been here for a few years now, we're just trying to continue that and pass that on to some of the younger kids. Because it can be a little overwhelming your first semester, and it's like you need a committee, you need your program of study, and you have to plan out all your classes for your entire time here. And if you're like me, I'll be here for 5 years for my grad degree, so year 4 of 5 right now, hopefully. But that's a long time to plan classes and kind of plan what your research looks like when you don't necessarily know. And so just trying to help out and just try to make that transition process a little easier. And it's just something that people did for me that I wanted to make sure kept going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, how would you say the UND Graduate Studies program has, supported you, or maybe even supported others through academics and then research too?
Yeah, honestly, I feel like I'm repeating this a lot, but just connections. Yep. The grad school does a fantastic job of hosting a lot of events. I actually met a ton of students that are biology graduate students at some of the beginning of the year events that I hadn't even met yet within the department. And so there's a lot of events that were super helpful. There's certain forms and processes with the university, such as, it's called IACUC. I can't remember the entire name of the abbreviation, but it's basically a process that you have to go through here if you're doing any sort of research with animals, and it's got to be approved by the university. And so there's IACUC processes. There's very similar processes for if you do research where you have human participants, whether you're doing surveys. And so I would have never heard of those terms or known what to do if it weren't for some of the grad school study hours, but then also my advisor. And so that's been really beneficial to have that to talk to. But and within the biology department, we have a graduate student association, which I'm not sure where that was started. I know it was here before I came here, but the graduate students in our department, we have over 20, and I have very close relationships with a lot of them. We do events monthly, and it's been incredibly helpful because there's nobody else who understands or can quite have the same experience or close to you as they can. So if you have questions, or whether it's about research, classes, could be personal stuff as well, just those events and building those connections with those students within my department has been incredibly helpful. Could not recommend joining those organizations or attending those events enough.
Mm-hmm. Future goals once you graduate, where do you see yourself maybe in the next 5 years?
Oh my gosh, yeah, it changes all the time if I'm being honest, but after I graduate, I would love to continue to research birds. That's kind of the main goal. I've always been passionate about birds, and just have continued to want to do research. And even on the hard days of my PhD, at least I get to say I have an awesome job, getting to go outside and spend outside researching, birds I'm passionate about. And so I would like to continue to do that, whether that's in academia or any type of organization that allows me to do research. I'm open to that, as long as there's research component, working with birds. 5 years from now, I definitely will be graduated. I'm making sure that happens. But I guess I don't necessarily know. 5 years from now, graduated and pursuing some research questions on birds.
Mm-hmm. Well, there you go. And then last question. What would you say has been your most memorable moment here at UND, or even just like a good piece of advice you've been given?
My goodness, I might have to think about that for a second. I guess some of the best pieces of advice, again, just say yes to everything. Like I mentioned earlier, it's always valuable knowing what you want to do and what you don't want to do. You're never going to know the answers to those questions if you don't say yes. But just making sure that you have connections and you feel like you have that support system on those days when your research gets rough, or sometimes you and your advisor aren't necessarily agreeing on something. You need to be able to have that passion and that relationship to fall back on. One of my greatest memories, oh my gosh. Some of my greatest memories, I can't pick just one, but a lot of it has probably seeing a lot of, well, I guess a lot. I only had 2 students so far, but I've had 2 students that were recent graduates from the Fish and Wildlife program at UND. And while they were waiting in that transition period post-graduation, they came and spent each of them a year working on the turkey project with me. Mm-hmm. But it's been really fun to see myself change and grow as a mentor, but then also now seeing both of them be graduate students here. And one of them now has their own technicians. And so it's really fun to kind of see that continue. I feel like I might be aging myself a little bit with that. But honestly, some of my best memories are times with the lab and just seeing that progression of, the transition from me being an older student to the younger students. And then those middle students kind of starting to fill in the gaps in the roles, and just seeing the leadership, and just the cool research in our lab. I get to basically volunteer and go help random students when they got to go capture a bunch of birds. So I could be sitting in the lab doing research, and it's, hey, we have 40 ducks. Do you want to go help us put GPS backpacks or transmitters on them for 3 hours this evening? And, you keep spare clothes in your car so you can just go help out and do some fun stuff like that.
Oh, yeah. No, that's awesome. Well, that will do it for this episode of UND Grad Talk. Cailey, thank you for joining us and giving us all that insight on what you're doing right now. The turkey stuff is really cool to learn about, too. So, thank you again for joining us. And then for everyone else, thank you for tuning in. And we will see you next time.